You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. This week, my guest is New York Times bestselling author Andrea Bartz. In 2021, Andrea's thriller novel, We Were Never Here, became an instant New York Times bestseller and a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. In addition to writing numerous novels, Andrea has held editorial positions at Glamour and Psychology Today, and her writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal and Cosmopolitan. Andrea's latest book, The Spare Room, is out this week, and we sat down to talk all about the secrets behind her creative process, how she captures and organizes ideas, her methods for writing stories that resonate with readers around the world, and so much more. For this conversation with Andrea, I'm also joined by my friend Nathan Baugh as a special guest co-host for this week's episode. Nathan studies the world's best storytellers and tweets about it to over 220,000 people every single day. He also writes World Builders, an email newsletter about storytelling, which he sends to over 60,000 people every week. You may remember that Nathan joined me back in March for my conversation with New York Times bestselling author Mark Sullivan. And I thought Nathan would be the perfect person once again to help me uncover the success secrets of a great novelist like Andrea Bartz. If you've been listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp for a while now, then you know I'm a big believer that storytelling is one of life's most important and underrated personal and professional skills. Storytelling is a powerful tool to form deeper connections with others and communicate ideas that stand the test of time. I really enjoyed this conversation with Andrea and hope it helps all of us become more powerful storytellers in our own lives. So, let's pull the tarp and get straight to Andrea Bartz. How did you get into writing? Was this something that's always been a part of your life? What's the first time you remember writing a story, and what was that like?
I'm not sure that I even have memories of before I could write. I think as soon as I could write words and string them together, I was trying to come up with stories. I remember learning how to use my dad's word processor when it was still like a black background with the green letters on it. And I loved reading as soon as I learned how to read. And I just kind of immediately wanted to emulate that with my own stories. And kids are just so creative. I'm like envious of that stage of my life and all the kids out there now. So I would just sit down at a typewriter or at my dad's word processor, and I was writing poems and I was writing short stories. And some of them are still floating around in circulation. I find ones from third grade and fourth grade, and they're pretty cute. They hang together because I was sort of just emulating what I read in books myself. I tried to write my first novel when I was in fourth grade. That one, I never finished, but I probably wrote a lot more than you would think. I probably got a good maybe 20,000 words in, just sitting after school and typing away on the computer. So I think I've always been in love with the written word and in love with storytelling and kind of trying to put my ideas into stories.
We're going to get into it all, Andy. I've got so many questions. I know Nathan has so many questions. I'm curious. You mentioned not even being able to remember a time when you weren't writing. Was there a book that you read early on that you remember where you said, this is really cool, I want to emulate this, or I want to try and mirror what's going on here? Do you have a recollection of that?
I don't necessarily have specific books that set off a spark, but I was just a voracious reader. My mom would take my sister and myself to the library every week, and we would just refresh our huge pile of books. And so especially once I was into chapter books, Babysitter's Club and Goosebumps, I loved Goosebumps and scary stuff like that. I would read a whole bunch of it, and then I would sort of write my knockoff editions. I guess it was sort of like fan fiction, but I wasn't writing it specifically about characters in it. I was coming up with my own. But I think, especially the scary stuff really appealed to me, which makes perfect sense now. So I loved Goosebumps. I loved everything R.L. Stine, everything Fear Street, Christopher Pike, Lois Duncan, scary stories to tell in the dark, everything that had a little bit of a darkness to it. And so I don't remember finishing it and thinking, oh, I'm so inspired, I'm going to do exactly that. It was just, I would sit down at a computer to write something and I would just sort of automatically begin imitating these books that I'd really loved and these authors that I really liked, kind of before I understood that that's how you learn to write and actually a really important part of the process.
I was definitely a big R.L. Stine fan growing up. And it's no surprise that you write thrillers and mystery novels. You've got a new book out this week called The Spare Room. You had great success with your last novel. I've got the last one right here. We were never here. So it's not surprising that R.L. Stine and some of those others resonated with you. Was there a moment when you realized that you had a special creative ability, maybe relative to your peers, or was there a moment where you said, this is something that I could do for a living?
So, as I said, I always enjoyed creative writing, but then in college, I studied journalism because that seemed like a slightly more practical way to turn writing into a career. Although it's sort of ironic to think of journalism as like a fallback. It's such a tough industry anyway. But while I was, an undergrad, I did an internship at Condé Nast, at Self Magazine, RIP. And I absolutely loved being in a magazine office. And I loved the idea of being an editor and sort of curating content for other people and being able to be in these creative meetings and have big ideas and then work with other writers to actually write them. So I sort of put creative writing aside in college and vowed to become an editor-in-chief, to like really pursue magazine editing. And so I did work in magazine editing for, I guess, 6-7 years. And I worked all over. I worked at Glamour, I worked at Psychology Today, and I did really enjoy it. But the industry was sort of crumbling beneath me. So it was really at that last full-time magazine that I loved. I loved the team I was working with. I loved the magazine we were creating. And I came into work and we found out that we were folding, that magazine was folding. And it was the third or fourth folding I'd gone through at that point. And I had this idea for fiction. I'd been feeling sort of an itch to write fiction since I hadn't done it since, I guess, high school. It had just been a long time. And I thought, I really need some kind of project that I can't just wake up and it's taken away from me. I need something that I can, pursue and stick with because it's mine. And that was when I sort of doubled down on, okay, I had that vague idea of a murder mystery, a sort of hipster murder mystery. What if I'm going to have all this time now because I'm getting laid off. What if I really pursued it? So I don't know that I ever thought like, this is my calling. This is something that I'm exceptional at. It's more that writing is my one thing. It's the one thing I'm really good at. And I've known that. I did great in it in high school and college. It's my job. Most of my friends are writers. It's sort of my whole identity. And I think there's good and bad things about that for sure. But, when people say, oh, if you weren't an author, what else would you do? I'm still very stuck in like, I don't know, screenwriting, TV writing, copywriting. It's what I do. And it's just been, since I was little, like I said, kind of the one thing that I can fall back on that I just feel really comfortable within.
You mentioned getting back into writing after that last magazine folded. That first book that you started, did that turn into The Lost Night, or were there a few beforehand?
It did turn into The Lost Night. It was very fortunate that the first full manuscript that I wrote did end up getting published in a very different form from that first draft. But I decided to commit to it at NaNoWriMo, which every November stands for National Novel Writing Month. Every November, a bunch of people nationwide, probably worldwide, sign up and commit to writing 50,000 words in that month, which works out to about 1,700 words a day. And it's just sort of like this marathon. We're all going to be in this together and support each other and post about our progress kind of thing. And I thought that would be a really great way to sort of kickstart this manuscript. 50,000 words is about half of one of my novels, which are 320 pages. So I started working on it then. I hit 50,000 words with this sort of random idea I'd had about a hipster murder mystery. And from then I felt like, okay, I've come this far. I've written all these words. I really have no choice but to finish it now. I've come so far. And I'm sure you're familiar with the sunk cost fallacy. I luckily did not know at that time that I was really on step 2 of like 1,000. I felt like I was, on step 5 out of 10, maybe. I thought I was much further along than I actually was. So after I had this manuscript sort of like taped and glued and band-aided together that sort of worked, but sort of didn't, then I talked to other author friends and they helped me find, resources that would really help me understand how to write a book, basically how to outline a book, how to plot a book, how to pace a book, stuff that was just sort of lacking in that first manuscript. And so I ended up doing massive, massive rewrites. Very little of those original words actually ended up in the final product, but I kept the hook. I had this like original idea of a death in a warehouse party in Bushwick in 2009. So sort of the original premise remained, but the actual writing really, really changed a lot and was something I had to figure out after I had this entire first manuscript.
Andy, you recently put out a tweet and you said, and just like that, I have 20,000 words of book 5. So you're already working on something else. Bad words, mind you, but they exist all the same. That was something that really caught Nathan and my attention on your Twitter feed. Nathan, I know you've got a question on kind of the concept of bad words versus good words and refinement throughout the process.
Well, one, I love that tweet. It's something that so many very successful authors say is that first draft is not going to be great and you just got to work on it from there. And you just talked a lot about that with your first one. I'm curious, have you seen that stay pretty consistent as you've written from book 1 to book 3 to book 5, or has that process for you changed some?
Certainly, I've gotten better at understanding what a book is and what makes it work. So I don't think I'll ever write a book quite as rough as that rough draft of what eventually became The Lost Night, because now I sort of instinctively know, the beats that I need to hit at different points, for example. I know kind of how the story needs to move, even if I don't know exactly what will be happening at these different points. Something that hasn't changed is that I write without an outline. I start with sort of this idea for a hook. I start with a premise that I think is interesting and that will sustain my interest for 100,000 words and will hopefully sustain, the reader's interest as well. I might have a few ideas for, reveals or twists that will come later, but not even necessarily. And then I write my first draft to figure out the story. So people who are outliners, they somehow figure out the entire thing in the outlining stage. I figure it out in the writing stage. So in every case, the first draft is probably not as bad as it was for The Lost Night, but it's very rough and I can later go back. By the time I'm at the end, I understand what the story is, hopefully, generally. And then I have to go back and like rework a lot of the first, 2/3 to make them sort of match up with what comes at the end. But my philosophy of just like letting that first draft be bad and letting it go in the wrong direction and letting dialogue be super stilted and letting descriptions be cheesy and full of cliches, that I very much cling to. And it's one of the most important pieces of advice, in my opinion, that I give to other writers, because I was shocked by how bad my writing was when I tried to do fiction. Like I said, I thought of myself as a pretty good writer. I'd published essays, I'd published magazine features. I thought I sort of knew how my prose sounded. And then I started writing and I was like, this scene is awful. Like I didn't even know I could write so bad. But now I've learned that's just part of the process. It's part of getting ideas onto the paper. And then later you can refine them, make them sing, make the prose sparkle, tighten them up, get rid of stuff that you didn't actually need. And so for me, letting that first draft be really bad, and that's the stage that I'm at with book 5, letting those first 20,000 words be kind of a hot mess, is an important step on the way to having a book that I'm proud of and a book that works.
Andy, I think the advice that you shared there, I mean, obviously it's relevant for writers and authors, anybody in the creative industry, but I think it applies to everything. I mean, I think there so many people are afraid to just put something out there, put something down on paper. and they feel like it has to be perfect at its first brush, and it rarely is, probably never is. I'm curious, as you're piecing this together along the way, where are the ideas coming from? Well, actually, let's take this a step back. So you talk about trying to really get that first hook right. Where do the ideas for the hooks come from, and where do you get your inspiration for that?
So I worked as a magazine editor, as I mentioned. So I already had sort of this honed sense of whenever something is interesting, whenever something sort of snags my attention, it could be an advertisement, it could be one thing one person says, it could be something weird that I walk by if I'm walking in the park. Whenever something snags my attention, I sort of automatically have this second thought of like, oh, is there something there? Is there material there? And that was really useful as an editor because, for example, if I was having a personal problem or a friend had some sort of life crisis, in addition to hopefully being helpful, I could ask, like, is there a way that we could turn this into an article that would help other people as well? So I'm applying kind of a similar inquisitiveness and curiosity and kind of utility, kind of mining life for ideas when I'm trying to think of book ideas. So I have a note on my phone that's called Book Ideas. I have a Google Doc on my computer that's called Book Ideas. And it ranges from kind of an entire pitch to just like one little phrase that caught my attention or one little detail that like I just, for some reason, felt something about. I always want my books to explore something that I'm interested in and something that I usually don't have a lot of clarity about how I feel about it. To give one example, The Herd, my second book, is a murder mystery that's set within a bougie, exclusive, all-female co-working space. Kind of like, for those who are familiar, there used to be one called The Wing. And I didn't know whether I liked it or not. I didn't know whether I thought it was cool that it's feminist and only women, or whether I didn't like that it was sort of bougie and exclusive, and how can you be inclusive and exclusive at the same time? And what does that say about, commodified feminism, and on and on and on. And so I knew there was enough of sort of a beating heart there that I could wrestle with it for the next few hundred pages. So I start with just these sort of interesting bits and bobs that catch my attention, see if I can link some up, see what could actually become a story pitch. And then my sounding board is my editor at Valentine, Hillary Tiemann. She's a genius, and she's really good at taking something I come to her with and sort of getting at its like zapping core. She's really good at figuring out how something can tap into the zeitgeist, tap into sort of the national conversation, and choosing the idea or helping me sort of hone the idea that is most in line with that. And that's great because she has a very clear sense of what an Andrea Bartz thriller is that is sort of more refined than what I think of, because anything I come up with is an Andrea Bartz idea. So yeah, it's sort of like starting with this really wide net and then narrowing it myself, and then working with my editor to sort of narrow it down to something that we both are really excited about and that we think will resonate with people.
What you talked about with The Herd really stood out to me because there's kind of that juxtaposition, that like conflict there. It's like it's exclusive, but it's inclusive. And to me, that's a lot of great stories are built on conflicts like that. So I'd love if you just expand a little bit more on what you specifically look for. Like, are you looking for those conflicts that you can talk about for 100, 200, 300 pages that you can build characters around, that you can explore in those ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a tweet recently that was something like, if you're an author, you could talk to your therapist about something, or you could write 300 pages about it. Like, somebody made a joke about how all of us authors are just trying to work out our feelings on the page. And I think that's absolutely true for me. I also have a great therapist and, work out things with her, but all books, whether they're murder mysteries, whether they're thrillers or not, sort of hinge on conflict, right? Conflict is what we are looking for in any short story, any movie, any TV show, anything. Like, that's what's interesting to watch. That's what creates tension. That's what creates stakes. And so that's why you don't see a lot of books that are just about a very happy person who nothing bad happens to them. And at the end of the story, they're still just happy and great. Maybe in kids shows or something, but we're in it for the conflict. And For me, as I said, writing is sort of my only thing. It is the way that I work through a lot of my own emotions. I write essays about things that I'm kind of trying to understand for myself, and putting things into words. The act of putting things into words like helps me clarify my thoughts around them. I do a lot of like free writing as I'm working on a book to sort of figure out what I'm trying to say and where to go next and what a scene needs to do and all that. So I think for me, picking these big topics that feel timely in some way, and then seeing how that might inform the characters that I create, the world that I create, and the conflict, the situations that they find themselves in, is how these books sort of come to be. I mean, to give another example, in We Were Never Here, it's about these two globetrotting women, best friends, who kill a backpacker in self-defense and then get the hell out of Dodge because they're in another country. And that's sort of how the book begins. And I wanted to explore sort of women's safety especially within travel, because I myself worked as a travel writer before the pandemic. And I kept having people say stuff to me like, oh, you're so brave for doing that. I can't believe you would go there by yourself. Or I wouldn't want my daughter to go there. I wouldn't want my wife to do that. And there was just sort of this like hand wringing and this idea that women were really asking for trouble if they had the gall to travel by themselves. And I just sort of had this idea of like, okay, is this a way to keep women's worlds small? What would happen if women, instead of being sort of the receptacles of violence in a travel situation, were the perpetrators of it? How would that help them? How would that be justified? Would that still be despicable? And I just had all these unanswered questions about like, it's real weird that people keep telling me that like women really, really ought to be careful if they're going to travel like I do. And so from that, I, created characters who would have really different answers to those questions, right? And would take very different approaches to sort of that central conflict, that central question. And I put them in situations and locations that would sort of bring those differing opinions to a head. And then, like somebody with a dollhouse playing with dolls, I sort of explored, like I played out these scenarios of what would happen with these two very different sort of worldviews on a topic or on a theme playing out together and smashing up against a reality, a fake reality, but the reality that I've created. Does that answer your question?
That was fantastic. And after hearing your explanation, I am not surprised whatsoever that this was a New York Times bestseller.
Thank you.
It's so interesting. I mean, let's stick with the theme of New York Times bestseller. It was an instant New York Times bestseller, Andy. It's Reese's book club pick. I mean, this is a mega, mega success. Was there something that you felt like clicked with that novel that made it different in terms of its reach and relevance as compared to the others, which were all successful by their own standards? But this one just took it to a new level for you. As you said, this is the novel that changed your life.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely is. It changed the course of my career. I'm of two minds about it because on the one hand, part of it was luck. Part of it was that I pulled a winning lottery ticket with this book. And yes, I think it is a good book, but I think my first two books are good books too. And the fact that this one sold, let's say, about 10 times as well as The Lost Night and The Herd, I don't think it's 10 times better. To a certain extent, there is just that like really lucked out. There is one Reese pick every month. And like, wow, was I lucky that it was mine, because there are many wonderful books that come out every single month. At the same time, there were definitely things about it that I think really connected with people. I mean, ironically, I pitched this book before the pandemic and was working on it during the pandemic. I actually finished it in, that summer of 2020 when we were all sort of stuck inside. And yet it's a very globe-trotting kind of book. And it has this sort of expansive feeling, and it has, you start in Chile and you visit them in Cambodia, and it's sort of sweeping around the world in a way that I think felt exciting to people. I felt exciting to readers in 2021 when travel was still not verboten, but not easy in the same way, and not, traveling around the world was difficult to do in person and therefore pretty satisfying to do via book, right? So I think that was sort of something going for it, that I just happened to choose sort of a travel book to write next when I had no idea how that would hit. And then I think the discussions of women's safety and violence against women, and the fact that we call it violence against women instead of male violence, it's still about the victim and not actually, the discourse is not aimed at changing men's behavior in general to not attack women. It's about how women should be protecting themselves. And even as my book was coming out, there were still articles coming out about, how solo female travelers can stay safe, and, bring a door stopper to stick under your hotel door so no one comes in. And there's sort of this, I don't want to say victim blaming, but sort of this idea that like, it's our problem, not the problem of the perpetrators. And it just, for me, brought up a lot of questions of power and fear, and sort of the utility of fear, and how it's sort of keeping women in line and keeping women in a certain position, and perhaps preventing them from the very confidence boosting experience of doing things on their own, exploring. And I think that also just was timely and resonated with people. It was after the Me Too movement, and there's been a lot of discussion of sort of power and gender dynamics and sort of the shifting way that the genders can interact. So I think that was sort of fortunate as well. And I think it's just a really fun story. And I think I think I get better with every book because I'm learning with every book that I write. People always seem surprised when I say that, but I always say, like, well, if you started playing tennis 5 years ago and you kept playing tennis, don't you think you'd be better at tennis now? Like, I think I'm better at writing now than I was when I started the first, nine years ago. And so I think it was also my best book in the sense that I had taken all the learnings from the first two and applied them to just have it be hopefully very tight and very immersive and very pacey and thrilling and suspenseful. And so it was totally it's like a coalescing of a lot of different elements, and some had to do with me and some had to do with just luck and right place, right time.
Well, I know Nathan and I, we talk about luck and hard work a lot and consistency in our conversations that Nathan and I have offline, because I think with any high performer, you kind of create some of your own luck by showing up consistently and putting in the work and the compounding effect of that. Nathan, do you have any questions for Andy about just the consistency and the process and some of that things that maybe created some of this luck? I don't think you hit the lottery ticket, Andy. I think, it's the result of a lot of hard work and showing up on a daily basis. But I know, Nathan, you've got some questions on that.
Well, Andrea, I think you nailed it there. Like it's definitely a combination. Like maybe a lot of stuff that was going on in the world happened to lead to, like, your book was able to speak to so many of those things that the audience kind of compounded on itself because of those things. But when you started said book, a lot of those things hadn't happened yet. You didn't know they were going to happen, and you still had to kind of execute on a very, very good book to, at that time, to lead to those kind of life-changing events for yourself. I guess I'm curious, as an author, how does that play into your next book? Did it change your mindset around the spare room and how you were going to write that?
I was very lucky to have already sold the spare room based on the idea and based on just not even a sample chapter, just a treatment to my editor long before We Were Never Here came out. Oh. And so as soon as We Were Never Here, as soon as I was done working on it, as soon as it went to production, which was many months before it actually came out, I sort of moved my tractor beam over and began working on it. And so when We Were Never Here had its success, I didn't have this sort of like deer in the headlights reaction of like, how the hell do I follow that up? Like, what am I supposed to do next? Because I was already a good, 50,000 words into a new manuscript, which was The Spare Room. So I didn't have to worry about coming up with a new idea from scratch after the success of We Were Never Here. And it was really nice to have sort of this grounding thing of, even as everything was going really well with We Were Never Here, it was nice to sort of turn back to this manuscript and remind myself that as amazing and as incredible as this was not the end of my career. This was not even necessarily the pinnacle of my career. There were going to be more books, and I was going to keep writing. And, thank the Lord that this happened, because it gave me some sort of job security of being able to continue writing books. But in a weird way, it sort of sands a little bit of the high off the high and sands a little bit of the low off the low. To go back one book, my second book, The Herd, came out in late March 2020. Guess what? That was terrible timing. It was the week that bookstores closed down. Nobody was able to get it. People had their orders canceled. It just sort of fell flat because of the timing. And in a similar way, at that point, I had already sold my next book. It was eventually We Were Never Here. But there was a sort of horrible, crippling feeling of like, oh my God, no one's buying my book. My career could be over. But it's not, because I'm already working on the next one. And then in a similar way, as We Were Never Here was, staying on the New York Times bestseller list, and the movie rights sold, and all this exciting stuff was happening. It was sort of soothing to, instead of, I tried to enjoy it and actually take it in, which is a very hard thing. But I was able to keep saying, but head down, there's another book to write. I have a deadline for the next one, and I'm just going to keep on chugging along. And so, yeah, the really hard thing, probably the hardest thing, was pitching this book 5, this one I'm working on now, because it was the first time I had to pitch a new book from scratch after the success of We Were Never Here. And it's very different pitching books that you think people will read, and knowing that there's going to be, when there's a broader readership, there's going to be more disappointed people. And my editor helped me sort of figure out, like, what are the hallmarks of We Were Never Here that we can, bring forward into the spare room and eventually into book 5. And she helped me think about, what kind of world do I want to stay in? What kind of themes do I want to explore? Again, like, what is an Andrea Bartz thriller that even all of these new readers, again, 10 times as many books sold, like all of these, 90% of these readers are new readers, that they are going to continue liking for the next 2 books. So it was really difficult. And I don't think I have a clear answer of how, but eventually together we stumbled onto an idea that I'm really excited about. I am working on sort of that sample, that initial, basically act 1 of the book, and trying to get it right to set me up for success for the rest of it.
It's so interesting, Andrea, to listen to all this and dig into this all with you. I mean, I could literally sit here for days and ask you questions about this, and I know Nathan could as well. But when you talked about this huge hit that this book was, the We Were Never Here book was, and how you didn't see it as the pinnacle, as your career is still very much evolving. And this is just, in my opinion, this is just the beginning for you. You've got such a bright future ahead of you. How do you process and think about, like, areas of growth as a writer? Like, if you had to, like, say, this is the biggest area of growth for me as a writer professionally, is there one that you can pinpoint that you still believe is important for you to master?
That's a great question. To a certain extent, when I start a new book, it always feels like starting from scratch. You've probably heard this from other authors too. Like, you sit down with a blank page, and the blank page is always intimidating. And you start writing that first scene, and you're like, man, this is bad. This goes back to those really bad 20,000 words I have written at this point. So I think confidence from having completed now 4 books is something new that I get to, like, that I think I've earned the right to, like, bring to my writing process of, like, okay, I know that it feels like I'm writing something awful that will never come together, but I know from doing that 4 other times that, like, eventually it will. So I need to just quiet that voice. I need to just take that little voice and say, thank you so much for your concern, but, like, you're going to go sit over there and I'm going to write some bad words. So I think just that it's like the panic, the sheer terror of writing something new doesn't go away, but I'm getting better and better at kind of ignoring the inner critic and ignoring the, imposter syndrome and the voice that tells me that I can't really do it. So that is definitely something I'm working on. It's just the confidence and trusting my instincts. And I think this isn't exactly what you asked, but I'm so interested in so many things, and they're all sort of under the writing umbrella, but like the idea of doing exactly the same thing and writing a new feminist psychological thriller about complex relationships between women in novel form for the rest of my life, the additional 50, 60 years, like that terrifies me. I don't want to do anything for that long. I just love switching it up. I think that's why I'm a traveler, why I was a journalist. So while I haven't done it yet, I have dreams of, writing other genres of commercial fiction, for example, or branching into TV writing or screenwriting and sort of adding new tools to the tool belt. And I know that in every case, I'll be challenged from day one because I'll be a neophyte again. I'll be a beginner at something. And that's really scary, but that also is what sort of keeps me engaged and keeps me interested. So I think I want to continue chasing beginner mind and keep being bad at things. I mean, what's the quote from Almost Famous? Like, sucking at something is the first step toward being kind of good at something. And I don't think I'll ever reach a point where I'm like, books, like I've got that down. That's nothing. But I do want to keep putting myself into projects that I think I'm bad at so that I have all this space to grow and learn and keep doing different things.
That is such a powerful message. I think that everybody listening can learn from and use to inspire them. Take on projects you're going to be bad at. Take that blank screen and feel that moment where you're just starting anew. Andrea, we've talked a lot about writing and books, but I think these lessons are they're so applicable to everything, any career, any aspect of life. I know Nathan is so passionate about storytelling, and he's gotten me to be a huge believer in the power of storytelling and how storytelling is not just for authors. And I think that's an important message for us to wrap up on, is that storytelling is not just for authors. Storytelling is an unlock to your success in almost anything in your career. The ability to sell, the ability to market yourself, the ability to just engage people is such a powerful tool to have in the toolbox. I know we're all better for it, having had this chance to speak to you, Andrea, and dig into your story. I know the best is yet to come. The Spare Room is out. You can get it wherever you get books, and I'm just so excited to see what you do next and all the other things that you're going to start being bad at that you're going to become excellent at. It's really, really inspiring to see. So thank you for spending a few minutes with Nathan and I this week, and keep pulling the tarp. All right, Andy?
You got it. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.